Part 108. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1087. Watching the plane taking off in front of him, Subai's eyes seemed a little wandering. Yingying left. She only stayed here for 1 day and stayed with him for 1 day. Subai himself was a little confused. Maybe, now there is another choice or something called another one maybe in front of him, but he seems to have no strength and no idea to grab it. I already have someone else in my heart, and I can't tolerate you anymore. Perhaps, this sentence is the most suitable for Subai now. People often say to put down hatred and look forward, but most of them are just helpless actions. If there is a chance, if there is confidence, if it is possible, only if you are happy with your grudges, can you it is the life that everyone longs for. He had made great ambitions and vowed to kill his so-called parents countless times. Now, it was impossible for him to take any other wrong path. The plane had already gone away. Subai stood up and clapped his hands. This farewell. Maybe forever. Looking back, the Chengdu plane is so neat and orderly. This world, the buildings here, the humanities here, and the life here will all be far away from me in the near future. I don't know if I will ever come back one day. There is some melancholy in my heart, but it is not very heavy. He lit a cigarette, took a heavy drag, rubbed it with his fingers, and then put out the cigarette butt. This state of mind is not suitable for me, especially when I will face a real life or death situation in the near future. The success of the enlightenment only makes you qualified to get close to the chessboard. Whether you can sit down is still unknown, so you don't have to think about whether you can beat that person. When we returned to the small temple, it was already afternoon. The monk had achieved enlightenment. Subai had sensed it when he was in Chengdu, but the monk became more and more restrained. This aura of enlightenment was really too weak, and he probably couldn't leave Sichuan. The monk prepared the vegetarian meal and made some snacks. Just as Subai came back, everyone started eating. It's not considered lunch or dinner. It's purely that everyone will go their separate ways again and let's have a meal for now. The monk wants to travel throughout Southeast Asia and go to those temples to collect faith. The Buddha wants to go back to his temple to prepare some things. The fat man has no intention of leaving, but 2 of the 4 of them are already leaving, which can be regarded as a semi-disbanded group. The meal was very peaceful, even the fat man who usually liked to yell didn't talk much. After the meal, the monk left with a package, like an ascetic. Buddha also left a little later. He said that he would go back to the temple to find some scriptures. If he wanted to use demons to prove the Tao, he had to make some preparations. The fat man's soul and physical body were merged into one, but he still sat in front of the statue of Sanking. The little guy fell asleep. Ji Xiang was watching beside him. Ruyi will accompany you in front of Fugui's tombstone on the hillside as always. It's a bit cold this night. Subai was sitting alone on the steps at the entrance of the small temple. The moon and stars are sparse, but it is extremely lonely. Today seems to be a day of farewell, everyone is leaving, everyone is leaving. But some of them will be seen again, and some may never be seen again. Subai didn't feel much pain in his heart. His experience as a guardian of the place of enlightenment taught him how to endure loneliness. This little bit of cold wind would not make him feel cold. However, this day was indeed not that pleasant. In the distance, there was a little light, as if someone was walking on the hillside at night and holding a torch, because the light was constantly swaying. This was definitely not the light of a car light or a flashlight. Then, the light began to get closer and closer, and became clearer and clearer. Someone is holding a torch and coming from the horizon. It is very elegant and otherworldly. Although there is no actor to scatter flowers and play music, the stars in the sky become his back. Subai didn't seem to recognize this person, but he was walking towards here. This is a man over 50 years old. He looks a little old, and his figure is a little stooped. This is not pretending, nor is it affectation. This is his truest and most essential state. After getting closer, Subai suddenly realized. Recognized. It's him. Let's see you. The other party held 2 bottles of white wine in his hand and sat down on the steps next to Subai naturally. 1 bottle per person. Fair enough. I didn't know you were the one who became enlightened. Subai smiled and lamented that fate plays tricks on people. These days, some people from the East and the West have testified. Of course, Subai didn't pay much attention to these things. Do you mean by what you said, that I died long ago when I was a senior? The old man also laughed. It is true that my life is not as exciting as yours, nor is it as thrilling as yours, but I am finally getting better step by step. I have come out, and now I have attained enlightenment, so I have no regrets. Perhaps you are the radio's favorite listener. Subai took a sip of wine. The alcohol content was very high. No, I'm not, especially now. The old man shook his head. After all, I still owe you a thank you. You let me go last time, but we were already even. Subai replied. Haha. The old man took a sip of wine. My son is terminally ill. Subai was stunned for a moment. Some don't understand. What's wrong? I'm not asking about terminal illness, because there is a big brother's biological father. Terminal illness is nothing, and now broadcasting no longer recruits experiencers, so there is no problem if the big brother takes action himself. Subai's question is, why is this a problem? I didn't want to save him. The old man looked a little depressed. Last time, you saved him at the explosion site. In fact, he should have died long ago, right? What the hell happened? If I hadn't been there, he might have died 3 times recently. A car accident, an accident during fire brigade training, and an almost accidental poisoning. Do you think this is not a coincidence? Subai leaned back slightly. Can you be a bit promising? I used to be afraid of the radio and dare not save my son, but now I am afraid of those illusory things. Is broadcasting supreme? The old man suddenly asked. Subai was stunned for a moment. Shake his head. Road. Not necessarily, because it still has rules. Because of the rules, it can exist for so long. In other words, it will also die. That's right, there is something broader and more ethereal than broadcasting. In my opinion, the rules of broadcasting are nothing more than stealing the destiny and rules of a world or a period of time in this world for one's own use. But nowadays, you also know the state of broadcasting. It is handing over something, and it is preparing to go to that world. Therefore, the cycle of birth, old age, illness, and death, and the cycle of cause and effect, has resumed its most essential operation. Broadcasting is nothing more than the predecessor of the cause and effect, much, much higher than us. He couldn't be saved, and he didn't want to be saved. Every time I saved him, his next accident became more terrifying and frightening. Fortunately, my grandson was born last year. Subai chuckled. You are really pedantic. People have to learn to be humble. The old man took another sip of wine. Of course, you also have to learn to be free and easy. My son still has half a year left. I want to be by his side to see him off before I go to that world. I want to see him go with my own eyes. I would rather do this than have him suffer other tortures after I leave this world. If you have an opportunity in front of you, you always have to fight for it. Subai disagreed with the old man's attitude. My choice will be different from yours. You are different from me. The old man turned his head and looked at the small temple behind him. So, of course everyone's choice will be different. The conversation fell into silence. For half an hour. There was only the sound of the 2 men drinking from time to time, and they didn't have much conversation. You also have a son? The old man suddenly asked. What are you going to do? I plan to take him to that world with me, Subai answered without hesitation. Perhaps, In the past, Subai would have been confused and hesitant, but when he became enlightened, many of his thoughts had actually been understood, including how to treat yourself and how to treat the people around you. Aren't you just as selfish? The old man was obviously a little disappointed with Subai's answer. He is a part of me, and I am a part of him. I will let him choose, but he will definitely go with me. From the moment I adopted him, it was actually destined to be like this one day. Subai stood up and threw away the empty wine bottle in his hand. Haha, the old man smiled. See you on the train next time. See you on the train. The old man also threw away the bottle and slowly left, his figure beginning to disappear into the distant sky. Everyone has his own reluctance and his own ties, because for this world, you are born and raised in this world. This is not a journey, not going abroad, not going to the Antarctic or the North Pole, but leaving this world plain. And it's very possible that he won't be able to come back. Subai felt that this old man was a bit unkind. He felt uncomfortable, and then came all the way to come to him for a drink. As a result, he made his already not very good mood even worse. Junk emotions are indeed more likely to be contagious. After returning to the small temple and entering the bedroom, Ji Xiang raised his head and saw Subai walking in. The little guy is still sleeping soundly. He has always been carefree, watching cartoons and playing with building blocks every day. Perhaps, this is the simple life he wants. I will take Yuxuan to another world. Subai said this to Jixiang. Jixiang had always taken care of the little guy, so Subai felt it was necessary to inform Jixiang of his decision. However, Jixiang didn't have the expected anger. He didn't even scream. He just silently lowered his head and looked at the little guy beside him. Subai saw the black cat's eyes for the first time, and there seemed to be tears shining in them. Perhaps the reason why Jixiang doesn't struggle, resist, or get angry is it's because it also knows that even if Subai doesn't take the little guy with him, the little guy will be determined to go with Subai. The black cat felt very depressed. Because after a while, I wish I had an empty tomb. Good luck is nothing. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1088. The beautiful scenery of snow-capped mountains is something that many people long for but cannot reach. Those who have never traveled far may think how beautiful and fascinating the scenery in some beautiful plateau areas is, and they can even think of countless places to visit on their own. It will cleanse the soul and so on. In fact, the more beautiful and well protected a place is, the worse the living environment is. Of course, even if it is winter now, and even if many roads here are closed due to ice, this still cannot stop it. Foodies who truly love beautiful scenery come here. This is a team of travel companions. There are 4 men and 2 women in the team. Their cars were left in the B/U0026B in the village below. They walked up the mountain. The snow stopped, and the surroundings were white. The towering snow-capped mountains and the clear blue sky gave people a real feeling. The feeling of pure beauty. Let's stop here. Everyone can take a rest. We won't go up. Please pay attention to safety. The leader was a middle-aged man with a beard, dark skin, but a strong physique. Everyone stopped and started taking photos and group photos. There were 6 people in the team, 2 couples and a local guide. Now, 2 couples were posing in various poses to take photos. In addition to the guides who were observing the environment, there was also a young man. Sitting on the stone and looking at the distant scenery, I ate the compressed biscuits in my hands. Mr. Liang, let me take a photo for you. The guide came over enthusiastically. He thought that because everyone was paired up with couples, the man named Liang Chuan seemed a little lonely. Thank you, no need, the young man named Liang Chuan refused directly. It's so hard to come here, why don't you take some photos to commemorate it? The guide was a little confused. After all, Climbing snow-capped mountains on the plateau is not an easy task. Just keep it in mind. If you want to come again later, just come again. The young man continued to eat the biscuits, looking very peaceful. The guide knelt down beside him and said, "It seems that you often come out to play. Nowadays, life is very stressful. For most ordinary people, it is difficult to find time to travel a year, so this has led to the habit of taking enough photos when you finally get out of a scenic spot. Fortunately, I don't go out much." The young man smiled. "I haven't been out for a few years." "What's your job?" "I." The young man paused, as if thinking for a moment, and said, "A psychiatrist." That job should make money quickly, right? The guide's thinking was very simple. "Actually, I don't make as much as you," the young man joked. "Hey, I'm living off mountains and rivers, but it's actually hard work and tiring. I'm tired of seeing the scenery here. Traveling means going from a place where you are tired of staying to a place where others are tired of staying," the young man said. "That's quite interesting." Just then, there was a shout from the young couple who was taking pictures over there. The guide immediately stood up and asked, "What's wrong?" "There's a guy over there, walking on it," one girl replied. The guide immediately looked up, and sure enough, on the snowy slope ahead, there was a man in a windbreaker walking there. He walked very slowly, as if he was holding something in his arms. "There is a child in my arms," exclaimed a man holding a camera. "In this season, in the snow-capped mountains, I was actually walking with a baby. Damn it, damn it." The guide was anxious. He thought this was the kind of travel companion who didn't understand the rules. Generally speaking, in his opinion, it would be best for such people who didn't understand the rules to die. But unfortunately, once someone is found missing or lost here, when the time comes, the superiors will have to ask them to come over and search, which is a thankless task. And that place has exceeded the standard, and there may even be ice holes underneath. He usually doesn't go back there himself. The guide did not shout loudly, but took out his flag and started waving it desperately. He hoped that the man would notice this and then take him down for free. The young man named Liang Chuan also turned his head and looked over, with a hint of doubt in his eyes. The snowy mountains were cold, but the other party was only wearing a windbreaker. Wasn't he afraid of the cold? But the man didn't seem to notice the guide's flag and walked deeper. The guide hesitated for a moment, but did not catch up rashly. He had to be responsible for his group of customers first. Everyone showed a kind of indifference to human life at this time. This may be a natural mentality. If the man asked for help, it is estimated that everyone here would try to rescue him, but the other party insisted on going his own way without a guide. This kind of rush people who want to hang themselves are better off dead. Pack up your things and get ready to go down the mountain. It is easy to go up the mountain but difficult to go down. We all set out in the morning and it was almost evening when we returned to the village. Everyone stayed in different B/U0026BS and separated when they returned to the village. Liang Chuan found a restaurant and asked the boss to cook him a bowl of noodles. Prices here were not cheap, especially for tourists. A bowl of hot noodles arrived. Before Liang Chuan had time to eat, he saw a man in a windbreaker walking in. The man ordered a few dishes and sat down at the table next to him. It was him, yes, the man on the snow-capped mountains during the day. The clothes of the other party are very thin, and the clothes of the child in the other party's arms are also very thin. This is a very strange combination, but the boss turned a blind eye when serving the food. Liang Chuan hesitated for a moment and stepped forward. Subai saw him, but ignored the guy, and focused on feeding the little guy. "Hello." Liang Chuan held a chopstick in his hand and tapped the edge of the table gently. The sound was crisp and had a special rhythm. Subai smiled. Shake his head. "Interesting." "Yes, it's interesting. The other party is actually hypnotizing himself. Subai looked at this young man. The smile on this young man's face began to slowly disappear. His body began to tremble. His eyes began to turn white. Subai frowned slightly and put away his smile. The other party was actually reading his memory. However, in an instant, Subai cut off the connection between the two, and the young man named Liang Chuan immediately sat down against the table. He came down, not because he wanted to continue doing anything, but because his body was very uncomfortable at this time. Just let him sit, and Subai continued to feed the little guy. In the past 6 months, the monk has been traveling around East Asia, searching for incense everywhere. He arrived in Thailand a while ago and even sent a few selfies of himself. The Buddha did not come out after returning to Tibet, and the fat man stayed alone in the small temple and stared at the Buddha statue every day. But counting the time, they were almost enlightened. After all, during this period, broadcasts frequently attracted people into the world of stories, specially designed to stimulate the audience by creating an environment that can untie their knots or help them advance. It's not that broadcasting doesn't understand the disadvantages of pleasing seedlings to encourage growth, but because it can't afford to wait. Su Fu and Qin Bing over there should not be idle. Once they are given enough time to establish a new Qin there, then broadcasting will completely lose its advantage. Subai has not been drawn into the story world in the past 6 months, and he doesn't know if it is because of his special enlightenment. In the first 2 months, he played with the little guy in the small temple, and in the next few months, he basically took his son to travel around. Are you already dead? Liang Chuan raised his head and looked at Subai. What was on his face was not fear, but curiosity, yes, eager curiosity. He seemed. No fear. Is it your special ability to perceive the memory information of the deceased? The little guy was full and sat obediently in his father's arms. Subai started to eat by himself and had time to talk. Who are you? Liang Chuan took a deep breath. This shocks me so much. In principle, I am a living dead. Subai has zombie blood, so he is indeed a dead person. Of course, the young man sitting in front of him is not an audience, he is just an ordinary person, but this guy has strange abilities. If hypnosis is a skill that can be learned, so being able to actively build this kind of memory connection with yourself is definitely not a skill that can be acquired through acquired training. However, there are indeed many strange people in this world. Even if we leave aside the audience as a group, there are still many unknown secrets. After dinner, Subai paid the bill and left. The young man did not pester him, but sat back in his seat knowingly. For Subai, this experience was nothing more than a simple one. Episode. Before he became an audience, he would have been very curious about this kind of strange people, but now, he really couldn't arouse any interest. The snow-capped mountains are just ahead, but here there are green grass and flowers, which is a wonderful visual difference. The little guy stretched himself. He seemed a little troubled. In fact, Subai has been trying to teach the little guy to speak for a while, but the little guy still only vaguely pronounces the sound Baba. Subai is not sure whether the little guy really can't learn it, or he doesn't want to learn it at all, but he still can't. He has been learning to speak with him without showing any signs of boredom. Because similar things have happened before. The little guy was playing with building blocks by himself, and Subai was lying next to him. Every time the little guy was about to build it, Subai secretly pushed it down with his hands, and then the little guy continued building the blocks tirelessly. Then slowly Subai seemed to realize that this was not like a father teasing his son in a playful way, but rather like a son spending time with his father who suffered from Alzheimer's disease. The little guy was completely lifeless and kept piling up again and again as if he was carrying the love of a fool. Lifting his son above his head, facing the direction of the snow-capped mountains. The little guy suddenly pointed his finger to the west. A sword energy that cannot be seen by ordinary people rises into the sky. Go home, Your fat uncle is going to preach. New train. It's probably going to open soon. The new book will be uploaded and released on December 11th, and the broadcast will be completed by the end of the month, so you don't have to worry about running out of books to read after the broadcast. Some news about the new book and broadcast extras will be released on the public account recently. You can follow Kongview66 official account, or directly search for Chen Disiaolong to follow this official account. The specific process is to click Add Friend on the upper right side of WeChat, and then enter Chen Disiaolong or Kongview66. If the search result shows that the user does not exist, click Search on the lower line to see it. Don't panic. Hug the dragon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disiaolong. Chapter 1089. In the small temple, everything was quiet, but above it, clouds were billowing and purple light was shining. If this situation existed in ancient times, local officials would definitely report to the court to say that auspiciousness had come. The fat man had just come out of the shower. He was wearing a black sports suit and holding a mahogany sword in his hand. He looked a bit nondescript, but he always felt good about himself and was fearless. The wooden sword did not point in other directions, but pointed at his chest. Puff. A sword penetrated. The fat man knelt on the ground, blood gurgling out from the wound, complementing the colorful clouds above. The blood formed a circle with the fat man as the center, and special energy fluctuations began to ripple all around. This was not a formation, but a sacrifice. The fat man regarded himself as a sacrifice. If there is a choice, no one is willing to go to extremes, but Fatty has no choice but to go to extremes this time. Enlightenment is a very difficult thing. Although Subai and the monks around him have the same enlightenment as eating and drinking. Easy, but not easy for fat people. Furthermore, although the broadcast gave him opportunities in 2 consecutive story worlds, Fatty was not satisfied, so he did not cater to the opportunities given by the broadcast. Rather than just ordinary enlightenment, it would be better to get a big one. The brave will starve to death and the timid will starve to death. The probability of Subai getting sick is getting lower and lower now, but Subai's previous behavior seems to have given Fatty enough psychological hints. There is no way, I can't compare with other people, they are all second generation, or there are great masters in my previous life, I am just a grassroots person. This is not jealousy, but reality. The fat man is cheering himself up, so naturally he has to think of himself as more tragic, and think of his behavior as seeking death as more grand. Subai was very fast. This time he was rushing to catch up with time and even spent a lot of energy. Of course, this was because Subai had been visiting a snow-capped mountain near the Tibetan area before, and the distance from here was not too far. When he caught up, he happened to see the fat man's suicide. Subai reached out and covered the little guy's eyes. I thought, it would be great if this great blood could be used to make blood. Subai didn't have the disgusting fear of blood that ordinary people had. For a long time, blood was Subai's food. The monk's blood is a great tonic and contains infinite vitality, the Buddha's blood is as mellow as strong wine. The fat man's blood is the turbidest, but the most flavorful. Fortunately, the fat man only knew that Subai was back at this time, but he didn't know what Subai was thinking. Otherwise, he might have a mouthful of old blood in his head and make himself angry to death. I finally mustered up the courage to preach in this way. Even if you don't care about my safety, you are still thinking about duck blood vermicelli soup. Time passes little by little. The fat man's blood is still flowing. The colorful clouds gradually turned into blood. The fat man raised his head. Let out a roar. Then, the blood on the ground began to boil and burn. The fat man's clothes turned into ashes in an instant, but a different set of ancient clothes gradually condensed into the blood mist. Wearing a long gown, a turban floating in the air, and the solace of King Yun boots rising steadily. Of course, if it were another handsome guy wearing this outfit, he would be quite cool, but the fat man's current outfit makes people feel like a big fat pig has ascended to heaven. Sudbai sighed and regretted not grabbing a camera to record the fat man's sermon. Really funny. All around, several spiritual consciousnesses began to fall down. This was because the nearby bosses discovered that there were fluctuations in the path of enlightenment and came to investigate. There are even some advanced listeners coming here. Similar to Fatty Sudbai, Monk Buddha, and others, they achieved enlightenment just like otakus staying at home. They didn't care about things outside. They only achieved enlightenment by groping and groping by themselves. But for others, they need an opportunity. Also requires experience, even if they are enlightened bosses, because many of them were coaxed by the radio, so they lack confidence and are more curious about other people. Sudbai waved his hand and instantly cut off the peeping consciousnesses around him. This was equivalent to Sudbai acting as a protector for the fat man, protecting him from outside interference. The monk is still taking photos with the ladyboys in Thailand, the Buddha is still meditating in Tibet, and the fat man is now preaching. Only Sudbai can come back in time. This is a tacit understanding that does not require advance notice. However, the consciousness of a strange boss seemed to be dissatisfied with Sudbai's tyranny and attacked again. He felt that he just wanted to observe the process and gain some understanding of his state of mind. Sudbai's one-size-fits-all behavior was indeed too shameless. But Sudbai had no intention of giving these people face. I saw Sudbai reaching out with one hand, seeming to grab something, and then pulled hard. Hiss. A bloodstain appeared on Sudbai's palm. And in a villa hundreds of miles away, a big boss who had just attained enlightenment had his eyes bleeding and was extremely embarrassed. This was just a small episode, interspersed in the process of Fatty's enlightenment, but it was also Sudbai's first attack after his enlightenment. Although it only showed the tip of the iceberg, it was shocking enough. Ordinary bosses have no qualifications to bargain in front of themselves. Seeing that Sudbai's palm was bleeding, the little guy puffed his mouth to let Sudbai breathe. Sudbai smiled and pointed to the fat man who was ascending over there. Your fat uncle had an idea for you before. Please see if you can help him. The little guy shook his head, not sure if he understood, but the next moment, the little guy grabbed the colorful clouds in the sky with his hands. Sudbai hesitated for a moment. But when I think about what happened to the little guy several times, I still think I should give it a try. The fat man is so kind to the little guy. He usually buys everything he eats, drinks and plays. Sudbai's figure flashed and appeared directly in the air. The fat man was stunned for a moment. What's the situation? I am ascending, and you, Sudbai, are going to make hair on my head. But the fat man did not stop his movements. His breath was constantly rising, abandoning the physical body, achieving true freedom, and seeking the so-called transcendence in the Taoist truth. The evolution of the soul, the separation of the physical body. In the three realms, I am at ease. The little guy seemed to want to play with these colorful clouds. Sudbai let him go, but slowly, Sudbai found that the clouds in front of the little guy were slowly changing. When primary school students write essays, they often write, the white clouds look like sheep, horses, camels, etc. But now, the piece of colorful clouds in front of the little guy is slowly condensing into a human face. This was the face of an old man, full of ravines. He was obviously older, but Sudbai didn't know who he was. The fat man who was preaching over there was stunned for a moment when he saw this scene. Grandfather? Is this the fat man's grandfather? That bastard gentleman who tells fortunes for fat people and makes them keep eating meat and getting fat? The clouds are not real people, just models of people, but at this time, there is a strange fluctuation in the clouds. In the dark, it seems that the souls of the dead who have disappeared for many years are returning, watching everything below. This feeling is a bit like Sudbai finding Erbai from the underworld when he first attained enlightenment. This cloud did not give Fatty any substantial help, but at this moment, Fatty seemed to have been given a shot of chicken blood. His soul began to hatch and breed again. The wind, rain, thunder, and lightning around him kept intersecting, creating a dazzling scene. Blueprint. The monk once said that Fatty's grandfather might also be in the audience. He was equivalent to helping Fatty change his fate, because Fatty had also calculated his own fate before. In ancient times, the fate of a person like him was Wang Mang or other rebel leaders. In modern times, he was about to eat peanuts, but somehow he lived well, and in the end he became the audience. Perhaps it doesn't matter whether the fat man's grandfather is a listener or not. This cannot be verified. Unless the broadcast gives a clear answer, no one will know. But radio cannot meet this requirement. Click. The body disintegrates. The soul manifests. Once transformed into a god, the fat man seemed to have a chance to shape his face. The spirit replaced the physical body and reshaped a new self. However, the fat man did not choose to make himself thinner and more handsome. He still maintained his original appearance. The sermon is over. Not too much trouble. Even if the fat man made a risky move, he was still prepared. The colorful clouds dissipated, the clouds rolled and relaxed, and the picture of Grandpa had long since disappeared, but the fat man knelt there and kowtowed 3 times in the direction of the original cloud. Then he stood up and looked at Sudbai. I've been bored to death for the past 6 months, and I finally finished the exam. It sounds like you have taken the college entrance examination before. That's almost it. The fat man was obviously in a good mood, and it seemed that he had been hiding something in his heart. Sudbai was a little confused at first, but slowly, he understood. Fatty has been unable to get hard on that thing for more than half a year. Now that he has successfully achieved enlightenment, his soul has transformed into a spirit, and he has reshaped his new body. He probably wants to test whether the function in that area can continue. However, at this moment, the fat man's expression suddenly changed, and he covered his chest with his left hand. Sudbai was fine. The fat man took out his mobile phone and saw a message pushed on the WeChat official account. I've already attained enlightenment and you still have to let me enter the world of stories. The fat man clicked on the picture and text push and found that it was a QR code with a logo on it, train ticket QR code ticket. The fat man looked at Sudbai. Sudbai also took out his mobile phone, clicked on WeChat, and found that he also had a push message. It's also a QR code photo. But the difference between me and Fatty is that the QR code on my side is gray, and there are also yes and no options. Do you accept train tickets? You are really privileged, the fat man sighed. Sudbai shrugged indifferently, stretched out his hand and clicked yes. The next moment, the QR code was sent. There is a time display on it. Departs in 30 days. How many people have been enlightened recently? Sudbai asked. He didn't care much about these things. It's quite a lot. Broadcasting has provided the best conditions and convenience, and the harvesting has encouraged a big wave. I guess the broadcasting can no longer sit still. Sudbai nodded. It's not just the radio that can't sit still. Sudbai himself couldn't sit still. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1090. Use less oil when frying eggs. Xie Zhen reminded from the side. Okay, Boss Liang followed suit. After a while, breakfast was finished, and the two of them sat at the table and ate breakfast quietly, with soft music playing on the stereo. After that, Boss Liang took the initiative to wash the dishes, while Xie Zhen went to prepare fruits and mix wine. After that, Boss Liang began to lie on the wicker chair on the balcony and read the newspaper, while Xie Zhen sat next to him and read the documents of the game company. In less than a month, the two of them have to leave this world, but for them, their lives seem not to be affected at all, and they even seem more tranquil and ordinary than before. After experiencing a lot, I understand what is worth cherishing. Even if time is running out, I cherish the peace at this time. Is it time for you to preach? Boss Liang put down the newspaper and asked. It's almost time, wait for the next story world, Xie Zhen replied. In fact, Xie Zhen's morale was too low. During this period, he was a little too addicted to this kind of life, which led to a lot of slack in enlightenment. But after all, he has a solid foundation. He has the legacy of Fusu in the past and the blessing of the radio in the future. It is really not a big problem to preach before getting on the train. Boss Liang nodded. I will find a designer tomorrow to design a tombstone plan that we like. After we go there, we will carve out the tombstone first. It feels numb. Ji Zhen shook his head. It should. The two fell into a familiar silence again. After a while, Ji Zhen stood up, put a piece of orange into his mouth, chewed it, and then said. In half a year, the number of bosses actually exceeds 50. With 1 month to go, there may be more than 80 bosses. It's estimated to be close to 100. Those who had no talent or qualifications to be enlightened were directly promoted by the broadcast. Only about 20% of these big guys have the same level as the previous big guys. The remaining 80% are parallel imports, which are better than high-end listeners, but their strength is limited. Yes, Ye Zhen nodded. I can't wait for the broadcast. It can't wait any longer. God knows how those Qin troops were struggling in that world. But fortunately, with 2 consecutive story worlds, the broadcast finally made the listeners accustomed to how to cooperate and fight in team battles. When the time comes, we can go to that world. And it's not like we don't have the strength to fight. Boss Liang pointed at himself. Actually, the key lies in me, the woman Chen Ru, and the little detective. Oh, has he been placed in such a high position by you? Xie Zhen was a little surprised. He stopped taking action after his enlightenment, and no one provoked him. But I can feel that his strength cannot be measured with ordinary eyes. You also notice the movement of that enlightenment. To what extent? Everyone he knew it all in his heart. Moreover, his sermon was the most special one, there was no doubt about it. A group of sheep led by a lion is more powerful than a group of wolves led by a sheep. Xie Zhen took another look at his boss. Are you wondering whether you are a lion or a sheep? Don't you have some idea? Boss Liang's face turned red, but he continued to pretend to be calm. The key is to rely on peak combat power. The Qin army's military formation is rigorously coordinated and natural. Unless we have a sharp knife that can pierce his military formation, it will be difficult to maintain a stalemate. However, I don't know why the little detective went to that world. Maybe he and we are not on the same goal line. It doesn't matter to him, right? But for us, it doesn't matter. Boss Liang sighed. Anyway, let's take it one step at a time. I'm not the tallest one. The breeze blows, bringing a bit of coolness. And in the distance on the horizon, there seemed to be a faint sound of a train. In Antarctica, among the ice floes, a woman was floating there. Her body was constantly exuding a terrifying sharp energy. Not only was the nearby ice cap cut into pieces, but the surrounding wind and snow seemed to be cut into pieces. Shielded. In the past 6 months, Chen Ru has not been able to get news from anywhere except entering the story world. In fact, she has always stayed in this inaccessible place. Unlike other listeners who have family members and their own lives to say goodbye to, she has always been alone, and even if she leaves, she can go free and easy. Chen Ru now is like a sharp sword. Before, she had been left with inner demons by the figure of the old rich man, but she did not take the ordinary path to escape from the inner demons. Come out, but actively sink into it and let yourself go to that extreme. Going from one extreme to another is not beneficial to the Dao, but it can polish herself into the sharpest and most powerful sword. She is tantamount to an eternal existence, and she does not pursue the so-called eternity and height of the Dao. In her eyes, only one's own strength, only one's own fighting power. This is what she is after. Perhaps, now that things have happened, she still has to thank Lao Fugui. Without his shadow, she would never have been able to achieve such huge improvement in the past 6 months. As for whether she can really succeed in going to another world and whether she can survive, Chen Ryu really doesn't care. What she wants is to enter that world with the strongest attitude and have a hearty battle. If the woman named Lichi, if he is not dead yet, then he can compete with her. Chen Ryu has always been a pure woman. Subai also said at the beginning that she was a stupid woman. A woman like this could not become a wealthy person like Su Yuhang or Li Ji, who was good at calculating and planning, because she was not that kind in her heart. There are many twists and turns, she is just a lonely traveler, her goal is only to reach the peak of her own martial arts. At this moment, she woke up, and the sea water around her began to boil, like a new sword coming out of the furnace. It's getting late. It's time to go back. After the fat man preached, he went to play. He played so crazily that he couldn't even look straight at him. He had been holding it in before, just like a senior high school student, trying his best until the college entrance examination was over and he was admitted to the university he hoped for. You can indulge as much as you want throughout the summer vacation. Subai's life was as usual, playing with the little guy in the small temple every day. Jixiang has always been with the little guy, never leaving, while Ruyi still guards the empty tomb. In the afternoon sun shines on your body, giving you a warm and comfortable feeling. Subai was lying on the sofa and saw the little guy crawling towards him. Then the little guy stretched out his hand and grabbed Jixiang's tail. Jixiang could only follow him obediently. "Daddy." The little guy pointed at Jixiang. Although the little guy couldn't speak, Subai was able to understand what the little guy wanted to express due to the heart-to-heart connection between father and son. The day to leave was approaching, and the little guy wanted to take good luck with him. In fact, it's not that Subai hasn't thought about this, but it's very difficult, because it's already difficult for him to take the little guy with him, let alone a cat. The structure of this world has been transformed by broadcasting. When the broadcaster and the audience leave, monsters of Jixiang's level can only be suppressed by the so-called way of heaven, and then live in seclusion in the mountains and forests. Once their aura is leaked, they are likely to suffer the blow of divine punishment. But taking away the good fortune is definitely not as simple as imagined. Meow. Jixiang called out, this time with a prayer. Jixiang rarely begs for help. No, it has never begged for help. Even when Su Yuhang took it away from the place of enlightenment, it was only Su Yuhang who deceived it with sweet words, not that it begged Su Yuhang to take it out. This black cat has always had a cold attitude, from beginning to end. I don't know if I can take you away. When I go to the station, I will take you there. If Su Yuhang is willing, then you should be able to go. Subai was only sure of getting the little guy on the train with him. Whether Jixiang could get on the train could only depend on the attitude of the broadcaster. At this moment, a majestic breath came from the west, and demonic flames surged. If nothing unexpected happened, it should be that Buddha had succeeded in attaining enlightenment through demons. All succeeded. It's time for everyone to go. Subai remembered that he once had a Japanese friend who was a client of his when he was a teenager. He once shared with Subai a diary of his grandfather. In his grandfather's diary it was written, "When you grow up, it's time to leave." His grandfather was a student soldier who enlisted in the army at the end of World War II and died on the Pacific battlefield. Regardless of the rights and wrongs of this war and the camps, in the latter stages of World War II, no matter how much propaganda was carried out in Japan, People with a discerning eye could still see that the so-called Empire of Japan was about to collapse, but they had no choice but to can be drafted into the army and participate in the bloody dusk of the empire. Nowadays, Subai also feels this way. The monk has attained enlightenment, the fat man has attained enlightenment, and the Buddha has attained enlightenment. However, the four of them are not very happy because there is an execution ground waiting for everyone ahead. The real Qin army, different from the clones in the story world, is waiting for them. Subai turned around and went to the kitchen to prepare some noodles. But just when the water was boiling, Subai heard a burst of laughter coming from the living room. Subai frowned slightly and walked back to the living room from the kitchen. I saw a slender middle-aged man sitting in the living room. He was teasing the little guy and at the same time reaching out to caress Ji Xiang. Road. When I took you out of the place of enlightenment, I told you that I would take you to see the outside world. I won't break my promise. I will take you to see another world. Jixiang's expression was very confused, because it didn't know how it should face the man, especially when the man's son was also present. The little guy happily took a lollipop with the wrapping paper handed to him by his grandfather and looked very excited. Subai leaned sideways against the door and watched this scene. So sweet. Damn it. It's so cozy. The man turned his head to look at Subai, while stroking the little guy's head and said. He quite likes me too, you see. Yeah. Look, he can still call me by my name. He can do it as soon as he teaches me. I remember that you taught him for a long time, but he still only calls me daddy. The little guy motioned to the man to help him tear open the lollipop packaging bag. He approached the man and held up the lollipop. Yeah, tear, grandpa, tear, grandpa, die, grandpa die. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1091. Subai expected that he would appear, but he did not expect that he would appear in this way. After all, this is not a story world. Every time Su Yuhang appears, it is a blow to the broadcasting rules. In fact, it hurts the broadcasting itself. Fundamental. Perhaps, this man likes to engage in this kind of self-righteous warmth and hypocrisy every time, and he himself should know how disgusting his actions are in Subai's eyes, but he never tires of it. If a person is the most humble, he will be invincible. This may be what it means. A purely selfish person, a person who is so selfish as to be incomprehensible. His words, deeds, and actions are all designed according to his own preferences, and he doesn't care about how it affects others. He may even not care about his own goals or his own affairs, but only seeks his own happiness. Su Yuhang tore open the lollipop for the little guy and did not pursue the meaning of the little guy's last words. Jixiang ran away with the little guy in his mouth, but found that he could not escape from the living room. This short distance has been set up with extremely terrifying restrictions that cannot be crossed. Su Yuhang is a genius that even Lao Fuegui has to admire. After all, Lao Fuegui has a special status. How can a friend he values be ordinary? Furthermore, Mr. Zhao's affairs cannot be taken over by just pulling in someone. It seems that the only person who can be recognized by Mr. Zhao and Lao Fuegui at the same time is Su Yuhang, not even Lu Menjiao. Lu Menjiao can only be regarded as an addition to Su Yuhang's failure to cooperate with Lao Fuegui, someone who makes his life less lonely. Accessories that make you feel like home. Subai reached out and pushed gently, and all the restrictions around him collapsed. Ji Xiang hurriedly took the little guy away. You don't have to be so nervous, Su Yuhang smiled, he is my grandson. This was said as if the old Su family had always had a fine tradition of treating their children and grandchildren well. You came just in time. Subai tilted his head and his joints crackled. I know you are talking nonsense, but you can give me a beating. After attaining enlightenment, Subai was indeed qualified to beat Su Yuhang. The reason is simple. When Lizzie faced Lu Menjiao, he said that Lu Menjiao's strength had not improved in the past 20 years because they needed to sleep, avoid detection by broadcasting rules, and have no sense of existence. As for Su Yuhang, it was actually more direct. In order to kill the old rich man, Su Yuhang directly buried his own future with him. Therefore, with Su Bai's current strength after enlightenment, it is really not difficult to beat up Su Yuhang. If Lu Menjiao hadn't used the broadcast rules to help pull Li Ji into the story world, Lu Menjiao would never have been able to break through Li Ji's defense. Successfully took away all the war spirits in the Terracotta Warriors and Horses Museum. No matter how big or small, if a sun hits me, it will cause thunder. Su Yuhang turned sideways lazily. Moreover, I no longer have a body. I can only appear as a shadow. Even if you want to kill me, you can't do it. Su Bai didn't speak, just watched quietly as Su Yuhang continued his performance. I know what you are thinking and what you plan to do. To be honest, I have achieved my goal, but some of the arrangements I made in the past to achieve my goal seem to be overturning me in the near future. This is really not something that makes me very comfortable. Su Yuhang seemed very sincere this time. Su Bai still didn't speak. Some of the words he said before were already said in the previous story world. There is no need to repeat them now. I really regret that I personally created a pair of children who will destroy me at all costs. Su Yuhang smiled, but I am very happy. I will go find you. Su Bai looked at Su Yuhang and said seriously. He bent down and looked level with Su Yuhang, who was sitting on the tatami. Believe me, it will be soon. Okay, I'm waiting for the day when our family will be reunited. Su Yuhang stood up, his eyes a little blurry. Perhaps, there is a question that has troubled you for a long time, and that is how you were able to bring your son out of the story world in the first place. After all, at that time, you were just an ant and had no bargaining power at all. Su Bai's eyes narrowed. Haha, this is not my handiwork. After all, I was still dormant at that time. This was Mr. Zhao's arrangement. He used my destiny to create a new life in the story world. He and I have nothing to do with each other. We are two completely different people. But I'm dead. He must die. I thought Mr. Zhao's arrangement was tasteless and even ridiculous at first, but do you know how Mr. Zhao responded to me? Su Yuhang didn't wait for Su Bai to answer. He knew that Su Bai would not answer, so he continued. He said, "My son, he knows how to treat his own children better than I do. Isn't it funny? Isn't it ironic? I don't want to be too obvious, but I really found that things were really out of my control. This is very helpless. In fact, many disasters did not appear after I became a broadcaster. I now even wonder whether the reason why Mr. Zhao committed suicide was that he had predicted his own end, so he gave me the position in advance so that he could advance decently. Finish. But I don't admit it, and I want to continue. You are my heir. I am even willing to share with you the qualifications to become the Supreme Being. Or, you can also choose to spend more than 1,000 years in that world with your children, my grandchildren. More than a year was enough for me to fully understand and control broadcasting. After getting there, our family will become the most powerful family in countless planes. I can even change this damn broadcasting rule and make us true gods in countless planes. I am God. My wife is also a god. My son is also a god." Su Yuhang seemed very calm when he said these words. There was no madness that inspired people, but only an abyss-like peace. Gods don't care about the filial piety of their parents, and gods don't care about the so-called family ties. You see, the emperors in ancient times were just ordinary people, but the so-called ruthlessness of the heavenly family could come out. So, what about God? God's years are long. He will have an eternal life. You can live for thousands more, tens of thousands of years, or even longer. In the future, when you look back on the past, you will feel that you have lived for more than 10 years. Years of experience are totally worth mentioning. Su Yuhang looked at Subai. Of course, I'm not sure whether the goal of becoming a god can impress you, but I still have to say it. The most specific thing is a very simple sentence. You ruined me. It is equivalent to killing your child with your own hands. After Su Yuhang said these words, his figure began to disappear. I can no longer appear in the real world. There is not much power left in broadcasting. I hope you can make the right choice. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Yuhang disappeared from here. After a long time, Jixiang came back with the little guy. The little guy held a lollipop in his hand and took the initiative to ask Subai for a hug. Subai picked up the little guy and pinched the tip of the little guy's nose. The little guy chuckled. Even now, Subai couldn't hate Mr. Zhao for making such an arrangement, because without this arrangement, the little guy would not appear in his life, and he would lose a time worth remembering forever. Daddy, eat. The little guy seemed to notice that Subai was feeling a little depressed, and took the initiative to put the lollipop to Subai's mouth. Subai smiled and took the lollipop. At this time, the fat man came back after a night of unrestrained indulgence. When he came back, he looked around, and finally looked at Subai. Uncle is gone. It seemed that Fatty had sensed something before. Subai nodded. Oh, it's a good thing he left early, otherwise I would have bumped into him, and I would have. The fat man wanted to brag, but when he thought about who he was making fun of, he gave up the idea of bragging. It seems that your old man is still doing your ideological work. The fat man guessed the general outline of the matter. Actually, I am also curious, how strong are you after you became enlightened? A dozen, Subai asked. Anyway, you have become enlightened. Do you think I'm stupid? The fat man pointed at his nose. You are just in a bad mood because of your father, so you want to find an excuse to beat me up to vent your anger. The fat man seemed very smart at this time, and he actually guessed Subai's thoughts correctly. Lord Buddha has also attained enlightenment. I will call both the monk and Lord Buddha later and ask them to come back and get together again. We haven't seen each other for almost half a year, and I actually miss these two bald heads, haha. The fat man patted his belly. If we have enough food and drink, we can go on the road. I'm going to take a look at the grave. Subai handed the little guy to the fat man. The fat man was stunned for a moment and nodded. When Subai came to Lao Fugui's grave, he saw Ruyi crawling there. Ruyi glanced at Subai and went down first in a sensible manner. Subai sat in front of Lao Fugui's tombstone and didn't speak for a long time. At the end, he said, "It seems that we both encountered the same problem because of the same person." The cold wind swept across, making the surroundings even more desolate. Subai reached out and patted Fugui's tombstone gently, as if patting the person's shoulder. Actually, there was no need for you to be like this. You thought your choice was for my own good, but I really would rather not have been born, and I would rather not have this life. Well, when Su Yuhang tricked you, how about you slap him to death with your backhand? After saying that, Subai smiled himself, and then sighed. The train is leaving. I'll be leaving soon. I probably won't have the chance to visit your grave in the future. You were so kind to me, but I didn't have the chance to repay you. It's a pity. Subai took out 2 cigarettes, lit one for the old rich man and put it in front of the grave, lit one himself, took a puff, and blew out the smoke ring. Su Yuhang said today that he wants to be a god, the supreme god, and he also wants his whole family to become gods together. He. I don't understand. As an individual. What's wrong? The dead grass in front of the grave moves in the wind. As if nodding in agreement. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1092. The sound of the train has sounded long ago. A month is really not too long, especially when the countdown has started. You will find that the days really pass too fast, just like every day on the blackboard. Erase it and write X days until the college entrance examination. The fat man contacted the monk and the Buddha, but the two eminent monks had no intention of coming back to meet up. The monk was still there selflessly searching for faith in Buddhism. The Buddha had just achieved enlightenment and was in the stage of nourishment. Everyone feels the urgency of time. After all, not everyone is like Subai and does nothing after enlightenment, nor is everyone like Fatty who indulges himself after enlightenment. You cannot stop others from pursuing their pursuits. If you yourself are degenerate and do not want to make progress, you are always embarrassed to drag others down with you. Compared with the time that continues to pass, it is undoubtedly a very luxurious thing to come back to drink tea and chat at this time. Some people can afford the luxury, but some people cannot afford the luxury. Subai and Fatty returned to Shanghai from Sichuan first, because the departure station shown on the ticket was Shanghai, which was almost exactly the same as the last time, except that almost all the people who sent them away last time died. In the past, that group of people was also a generation of geniuses, a group of people who stood at the top of the pyramid, but even the radio failed to send them back. What came back were only corpses and the last Qin opera roar of a disabled Qin soldier. Of course, Subai had no right to be sad about all this. Without his own push, Qin Bing would not have woken up, and what would happen next would not have happened. He was the initiator. Holding the little guy in his arms and standing at the iron gate of Lao Fang's house again, Subai had a feeling that things are different and people are different. In the years of the small temple, the four of them were together less and separated more, but the four of them really spent most of their time together. Most of them are in this building. There are many stories and daily life happening here. The little guy was also stolen from here by Jamie May. The house had been unoccupied for a long time and was a bit dusty. Subai and Fatty simply tidied it up and ordered some takeout in the evening. The vine that was planted auspiciously in the small courtyard has no obvious change, and even has a tendency to wither. This thing needs to be watered with something, but the watering thing is too harmful to the sky, and this thing has no effect on Subai. Use it, perhaps, it is the best destination to survive on its own. The attributes of this world have been determined. Regardless of whether the broadcast is successful or not, all existences that do not conform to the attribute plane of scientific and technological civilization will be severely suppressed in the future. Perhaps even more severe than when radio was broadcast. Ruyi and Jixiang were playing with the little guy in the living room. Subai originally didn't think Ruyi would abandon the empty grave and follow him, but the black cat followed him on the plane. Perhaps Ruyi also made his own choice. The world is like this. Even a cat has to make cruel choices about his life, let alone a human. It was still the original bench, still the original posture. Subai was lying in the yard, with a starry sky above his head. From time to time, a strong aura sweeps over here. This is not surprising. As the train departure time approaches, a large number of big bosses will arrive here. Some people know what it means to be low-key, but some people don't. These people are like amorous orangutans, eager to show off their muscles. In fact, Subai couldn't understand some people's brain circuits. Perhaps it was because the people around him who had more contact were Fat Buddha and the monk, and these people were all masters with profound knowledge and farsightedness, so I don't think it's anything, but some big guys are so naive that they're cute. They feel inexplicably confident about themselves after enlightenment, and even feel eager and impatient to try. The story world was broadcast several times in a row to allow listeners to practice how to deal with the Qin army's formation, but practice is practice after all. The real Qin army, real fighting, real bosses are like cannon fodder. No matter how realistic the practice is, It cannot be simulated. Oh, it's so lively. The fat man walked out of the bedroom with 2 bottles of beer in his hand and handed one to Subai. These guys really don't give people confidence. The implication of Fatty's words is that facing the Qin army with these teammates, they really can't muster much fighting spirit. Before the war actually starts, they are already drifting. I originally thought that the theme atmosphere in Shanghai at the moment should be Spring reflects the moon, but when I came back, I found out that they were playing Meet Me in 1998. Subai laughed as he spoke. Some people are really not afraid and are drifting away, while some people are afraid and therefore even more crazy. Fortunately, there are still some people who can see hope. Broadcasting has encouraged so many people, just to get more cannon fodder, the fat man explained. Subai nodded, yes, if there were no such people as Hills, Chen Ryu, and Yan Huiyong with personality and strength, these guys would feel like winners in life just by relying on these people after they attained enlightenment. Really, I am about to lose confidence in the outcome. Of course, there is also Boss Liang, but I don't know if Boss Liang can still show the domineering spirit of the past when he was really fighting against the odds. Talk about CAO. CAO has arrived. Someone knocked on the door, and he didn't hide his aura. It was Boss Liang. The fat man went to open the door, and Subai sat up from the chair. Boss Liang was empty-handed and held some gifts in his hands. He looked a bit like a newly married couple handing out wedding candies. The sweet and greasy taste seemed to stick to the air. Of course, the relationship between the two parties is not actually friendly, especially after what happened to Fusu last time. The two parties had formed a feud. Boss Liang deliberately killed people with a borrowed knife in the story world, causing Su Fu's clone to split the monk's body. In the past life and this life, we can be regarded as having grudges against each other. But the relationship between the audience is really extraordinary, just like how Subai and Fatty stabbed each other in the back yesterday and sat down at the wine table together tomorrow. Come to see you. Boss Liang sat down in front of Subai. Ji Zhen put down his things and stood behind his boss. He looked at Subai with a calm look, not showing any hatred, but he no longer had the kindness and familiarity he had before. The fat man stood behind Subai with his hands held in his arms. He was extremely clumsy. He looked exactly like the image of the younger brother standing behind the boss in Hong Kong movies. Subai didn't speak. He waited for Boss Liang to continue. Please tell me, Qin Jun, whether you intend to fight or not. I'm here today to ask you this question. This used to be the issue that Fatty Monk and the others were most concerned about. I don't care about your life or death, Subai said and glanced at the fat man again, but there are a few people, and I don't want them to die. The fat man squeezed his eyes hard beside him. Cry. I cried hard all the time. Create an atmosphere for me. Okay, that's enough. You haven't entered the story world these few times, so you don't know that radio has divided the world's boss-level listener groups into 5 parts. I will take one part here. Yours is Hill. C's friend leads one section, Chen Ryu leads another section, and you don't know the leaders of the other 2 sections. We're on the Hill's side, just like the first time. The fat man immediately bent down and said. Subai nodded and said nothing. He also believed that Boss Liang would not be confident enough to recruit him as his subordinate. In fact, dividing into 5 parts is already the limit of broadcasting. The 5 parts are not distinguished purely by race, but by strength, type of reinforcement, mutual relationship, etc. The quality of the audience is too complicated, and radio has already. There is no time to recreate a harmonious and beautiful audience atmosphere, so we can only make a fuss about preserving the maximum cohesion and strength distribution of each part. If we insist on making it a part, it will become a rabble with different ideas. With your words, I feel relieved. Boss Liang stood up and seemed to be planning to leave. We will discuss some things recently, but in your current state, you probably don't want to participate, right? Boss Liang smiled before Subai could answer, and said, "We want to survive, and you are the only one here. It's so fun to swing between life and death." "I don't need you to guess my mentality, right?" Subai asked. "Yes, you don't need me to guess." Boss Liang waved his hand, "then I won't bother you." Xie Zhen turned around and left with Boss Liang. It seems that this young couple is going to visit a lot of relatives and friends tonight. But while walking, Boss Liang suddenly stopped. At the same time, he said, you always know how to bluff. That's because you're too timid and easily scared." The fat man immediately started to hit the target. "Okay, but there's one thing I have to try. Otherwise, I'll be really unsure. Otherwise, if anything happens to me after I go to that world, I'll be helpless." Boss Liang said again. "Try what?" "Try, how many kilos will you have after you attain enlightenment?" Boss Liang turned around. Then he walked towards Subai again. For a time. As Boss Liang walked through the small courtyard, the surrounding flowers and trees instantly began to change from spring, summer, autumn, and winter, as if time had caused great chaos around him. At the same time, the oppressive feeling like the sky crushing down came over instantly. The fat on the fat man's face began to tremble, and his body began to tremble uncontrollably. Boss Liang, who is usually a coward, but when he shows his awesome side, it is really hard to bear. At least the fat man's calves are trembling a little now. However, Subai, who was sitting on the bench, remained unmoved. He even stood up directly. A majestic momentum burst out from Subai's body, and he hit him directly. At this time, the chi machines of both sides began to collide most fiercely. For a time, the stars in the late night sky began to dim. Even the big-name audience who had come to Shanghai were all in shock at this time, wondering what huge change had happened. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1093. Get down here. Boss Liang stretched out one hand and pressed forward directly. At this moment, he came with a huge force, purely using force to suppress people. "I won't compete with you for blood. I won't compete with you. Just work hard and accumulate with you. Fight with you." This is a very shameless way of playing, because in today's world, except for Li Ji, who does not know whether he is alive or dead, who else has the seniority of Boss Liang? This guy was suppressed from Li Ji's peer to Li Ji's junior, and then he was pushed down another generation without getting a train ticket. In other words, Boss Liang suppressed Subai as a grandfather. After the death of Lao Fugui and the integration of Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao into broadcasting, the only one in the world who can be called the most immortal bastard is Boss Liang. However, Subai's figure remained motionless. Boss Liang stretched out a hand. Subai didn't even move a hand and took a step forward. Click, click. The surrounding space seemed to be torn apart at this moment. This was purely a competition in terms of momentum between the two, and it had not yet turned into a real fight. Boss Liang's overwhelming strength could not overwhelm Subai. However, Boss Liang did not stop his so-called temptation, and his style of painting suddenly changed. A series of ink paintings rippled around. This is a person's life, the most common aspect of all living beings, but it is also the way of all living beings. In it, there is joy, anger, and grievance, and contains all kinds of joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. This is the way. It's Boss Liang's way. Ordinary and unremarkable, it reflects the lives of most people throughout the ages. Those who are qualified to become kings and losers are ultimately a minority among the minority. The vast majority of people, whether in the past or now, or in the future, everyone will have to bow down to life and live in order to survive. Boss Liang's way is the most ordinary, but the most realistic. Break it, for me. Subai didn't get too entangled with Boss Liang because the two sides had different paths. Boss Liang's along the river during the Qingming festival picture of various aspects of life could not restrain Subai because Subai himself was already transcendent. The control of broadcasting can be achieved to a certain extent, but Boss Liang's way is not comparable to the rules of broadcasting. It was like Boss Liang had already hosted a hangmen banquet, but Subai just walked through the gate without entering, completely losing Boss Liang's charming eyes to the blind man. It stands to reason that this kind of testing can actually be over. Boss Liang made 2 moves, and Subai did not lose in both attempts. This is enough to explain the situation, but Boss Liang seems to have no intention of stopping at all. A bolt of lightning shot out from Boss Liang's eyes and shot directly at Subai. Subai stretched out one hand and directly held the tears. For a moment, countless electric snakes flew around Subai's body, but Subai's body was too amazing. These electric snakes could not break through the defense of Subai's body, let alone have any impact on Subai's soul. If you want to play seriously, then play seriously. Subai took a deep breath. The figure instantly disappeared on the spot and appeared directly in front of Boss Liang. Boss Liang took half a step back, and he was immediately close to the end of the world, but Subai's body trembled at this moment. This was a manifestation of resisting the distance and pressure of space, and he once again narrowed the distance with Boss Liang. Boom! Punch it down! Boss Liang blocked Subai's punch with both hands, but the environment around the two of them changed drastically at this time, and a huge crack appeared above their heads. After all, Shanghai is a densely populated big city. If you fight here, no one can do anything. It is better to change the place and have a good fight. Subai jumped directly into the crack. There were counter-currents of time and space everywhere in the crack. If he was not careful, he would be completely lost or shattered into pieces. Boss Liang glanced at the solution below and followed him into it without hesitation. Boom! 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 In the void, there was no sign of the two people. But the terrifying thunder roars continued to be heard. In the countercurrent of time and space, Boss Liang and Subai collided with each other again and again, and then separated again and again. The two sides actually fought hand to a close tie. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. You are so secretive that you actually strengthened your body. Boss Liang pinched his knuckles lightly. Last time, Su Fu's clone failed to make you really suffer. This time, I will personally teach you a lesson. My people are not something you can touch. Oh, okay, then I'll also collect some interest for the monk. The distance between the two sides narrowed again, and they collided with each other extremely quickly. At the moment of the collision, Subai's body began to wither, and the boundless corpse energy began to roll. The majestic corpse energy actually resisted the countercurrent of time and space around him, and attempted to strangle Boss Liang in it. Roll! Boss Liang's whole body was flashing with lightning, and the power of thunder was the nemesis of the evil power. For a time, violent explosions continued to occur in this chaotic area. Call! The fat man raised his head. Look at the sky. He had guessed that Boss Liang might be cowardly, but not necessarily weak, but he never expected that Boss Liang would be so strong. Damn it! I'm a boss too. How do you feel when you fight? It feels like mortals watching a fight between gods and immortals. And Dabai, I know you can fight, and you can fight even more after you become enlightened, but you are so good at fighting. Xie Zhen also raised his head and looked into the sky. They couldn't see the real picture, but they could feel the huge roars transmitted from behind. At the same time, the big bosses who had arrived in Shanghai were also aware of this scene. At this moment, many people who were originally restless were surprisingly calm. Some people who were full of confidence did not dare to be too arrogant when they saw this scene, while some people who were hopeless felt some hope in their hearts when they saw this scene. Perhaps, Even the two parties involved did not know that their confrontation this time could actually calm the morale of the military. But the parties involved are all fighting for their respective men. At the mouth of the Yangtze River, an ice floe floated over. The woman in the ice floe opened her eyes slightly and looked at the fighting scene above, with a vague sense of fighting in her body. The crack was opened again, and Subai and Boss Liang flew out together. The two of them fought in tacit understanding and moved all the way to the seaside. Get down. Boss Liang's clothes were ragged and he no longer wore the same suit and leather shoes as before, but his aura of never giving up until he achieved his goal was still the same. At this moment, he grabbed Subai's neck with one hand and tried to push Subai into the sea. Then use the vastness of the sea to seal Subai. When the time comes, there is no need to tell whether he is alive or dead. As long as he can win, he can end this duel. The sea of blood, endless. However, the sea below turned into blood in an instant, like a ferocious demon with its mouth open, waiting for Boss Liang to come to his door. Boss Liang had to step back and let go of Subai's hand. However, Subai had no intention of letting go. He reached out and grabbed Boss Liang's arm and pulled it down directly. But at this moment, a woman's aura suddenly rose. Boss Liang immediately winked at Subai. Subai let go of his hand in a tacit understanding, and the two of them disappeared instantly, and they all returned to the small courtyard of Lao Fang's house. Subai was still sitting on the chair. Boss Liang was still standing by the door. As if nothing happened just now. Chen Ryu was the only one who walked out of the ice happily, only to find that everything had disappeared. A magnificent battle came to an end. Subai himself did not expect that the first person he would attack after his enlightenment would be Boss Liang. Moreover, although he had reservations and did not really fight to the death, he still could not do anything to win over him. At the same time, Subai believed that the other party also had reservations. Ken. Boss Liang left these words, smiled, and turned around to indicate that Xie Zhen could leave with him. After the guests left, the fat man came over with a flattering look on his face and said, "Your Majesty, thank you for your hard work. Come on, have a drink of water." The fat man was actually very attentive and handed me a glass of water. "Hey, why did it suddenly become so cold?" The fat man looked around in surprise, and then saw Chen Ryu standing behind him. "Damn, here comes another big boss. No, am I not a big boss myself?" But today Fatty really didn't feel like he was also a big shot. It was a wonderful fight. Chen Ryu walked over slowly. Subai shook his head. In fact, he and Boss Liang were getting angry just now, but the sudden appearance of Chen Ryu's aura made the two men quickly and tacitly end the duel. No one wanted to play with this crazy woman. In Chen Ryu, Subai felt like seeing himself in the past. "What are you afraid of?" Chen Ryu looked at Subai. "What are you still hesitating about?" This is the second person today who has said the same thing to himself. Obviously, Chen Ryu also saw what Boss Liang had seen before. At this point, I still can't think clearly. It's really disappointing. Of course, I am not qualified to say such things in front of you, because I am still trapped in the inner demons of that time and cannot get out. Chen Ryu spread her hands. Her palms were actually cracked. This was definitely not frostbite, but meant that Chen Ryu's life was running out of fuel. "I still have 3 months to live," Chen Ryu said with a smile. "I sacrificed my longevity to gain strength. 3 months is enough for me to go to that world to decide the winner. I only want one result, a winning or losing result. I don't care how I die if I lose, or how long I can survive if I win." Immediately afterwards, Chen Ryu came closer to Subai, and her chapped lips leaned directly against Subai's earlobe. "Actually, it's better to think about things more simply. If you really treat yourself as an audience, you won't have so many ridiculous hesitations. Because I am not qualified to choose. Because no choice. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 1094. If Chen Ryu left, of course she would not live here, or even stay too long. Although Chen Ryu rebelled during the Fusu incident, because of the handwriting left by the old rich man, everything at that time lost the value of debate and calculation. Chen Ryu's actions also lost their meaning. Therefore, Subai and Fatty didn't have much hatred for Chen Ryu. They could only make fun of the stupid woman. But at least, Chen Ryu can no longer be with Subai and others like before. The relationship between people is actually maintained by that meaning. Once that meaning is gone, the relationship will be broken. However, what Chen Ryu said before leaving made Subai deeply touched. It's not that Chen Ryu said that she sacrificed her life and only left 3 months of life. For this crazy woman, this kind of thing is really not surprising. In fact, it is still Chen Ryu's description of choice. Perhaps. I really think too much. In the past, I didn't feel anything when I was in hard times, but as soon as the good days started, my thoughts changed. Subai raised his head and looked at the night sky that seemed to have become clearer due to his duel with Boss Liang, his eyes falling into some kind of contemplation. In the past, when I only had one road to Huashan, I could go all in and have a hard time walking without knowing where I should go next. Now, it seems that the conditions are better and I am more calm, but I am a little hesitant. However, a special energy wave soon interrupted Subai's contemplation. What's wrong? Fatty asked doubtfully. I want to meet an old friend I haven't seen for a long time, Subai replied. Why do you only have so many old sweethearts? Fatty said in a bored tone, looking at your usual otaku-like attitude. It turns out you can't even count your old sweethearts. Subai smiled, ignored the fat man's teasing, and disappeared directly on the spot. The fat man shook his head and went to warm the milk for the little guy, muttering. Men are indeed unreliable. Children are more important. At this moment, a little boy was crawling hard in the grave. His body was covered with wriggling meat maggots. Most of his muscle tissue had rotted. Countless snakes, insects, rats, and ants were shuttled through his body. His eyes, ears, and mouth were all covered with blood. The nose seems to be the door and window to these things. But the little boy kept crawling and persisted. For undead creatures, the standard of death is different from that of ordinary people. Ordinary people have no breathing, no heartbeat, and no temperature, and they will most likely be considered dead. As for undead creatures and zombies, you can't move, you can't move. That's considered dead. The little boy is now suffering from tremendous pain and pressure, but he has not given up, because once he gives up, an abyss will be waiting for him. Broadcasting is clearly going all or nothing this time. You can't get on such a train. You may still be able to get off work, but the only point left is to die. Because this generation of bosses is considered to be the strongest group that broadcasting can raise from now on, in the future, each generation will only be inferior to the last. The little boy gritted his teeth and continued crawling. When it comes to Phoenix Nirvana, gorgeous pictures often appear in people's minds, including the proud phoenix, noble wings, brilliant lava, and breathtaking and suffocating beauty. But Nirvana is sometimes not very fancy. Just like when the monk achieved enlightenment half a year ago, someone came to worship the Buddha and the monk became a Buddha. Just like this boy now, he is actually in Nirvana. Time passed slowly, but the little boy's body fell into a stagnation. He was tired, indeed tired. He is not a genius, nor does he have great opportunities. In fact, to a certain extent, he belongs to the group of people encouraged by radio. Even with the encouragement and support of radio, it is extremely difficult for him to achieve enlightenment. The cemetery area was deserted at this time, and restrictions had been set up around it. All the tombstones had been turned up, and the various urns showed various forms of exquisiteness. The little boy's father and mother are both staff members of the cemetery park. He liked to play here when he was very young. He is not afraid of it because this is his childhood and his playground. But now he is trying his best. But still missing that breath. Can't lift it up? It's really impossible to lift it up. Subai appeared here. As a zombie, of course he could sense the energy fluctuations of the little boy here. However, Subai did not expect that the two of them would meet again in this way. Perhaps, if Subai and he hadn't happened to be in Shanghai now, Subai would not have remembered the person who showed him the photo album. Boy. Subai took out the photo album and flipped through it casually. The little boy raised his head with all his strength. When he saw it was Subai, he just smiled dejectedly. He was a little tired. I even no longer have the energy to say hello to my former comrades. Your art photography in the past 2 years has become a bit cliché, and you have completely lost the imagination you had before. Subai commented. This is a very strange picture. A boy's body is almost rotten. Beside him, a young man was holding a picture album and discussing art with him seriously. I'm tired, the boy said. He is not saying that he is tired now, but that he is tired in his own artistic style. Subai nodded. Indeed, the following ones were all shot for the sake of filming. Although those people who were tortured to death by you and posed in various poses by you were all scum who deserved to die, but you wasted their bodies in such a way to take this picture. Planting garbage is really a waste of materials. Subai continued to comment. The boy lowered his head and said nothing more. He knew clearly that what Subai said was right. Subai remembered that when he came here before, this boy was sitting in a corner of the park office, flipping through this booklet in his hand. At that time, when the two met, there was quite a smell. No, they were sympathetic. Feel. The boy's aesthetic control over torture, death, corpses, and freezing temperatures is indeed unique. Every photo and every pose can make people in the same field marvel at the imagination of the photographer. However, people will always grow up, just as the boy used to be called a little boy, now he is called a boy. As people grow up, some spirituality slowly dissipates. Subai put down the album and took a formal look at the condition of this former friend in front of him for the first time. The oil has run out and the lamp has dried up. Let me help you, Subai said. With Subai's current identity and strength, it is not impossible to forcefully save the boy's life and support him to break through. Burn the second half of the album and keep the first half for your collection, the boy replied. In a certain sense, it was regarded as rejecting Subai's help. Even children are good at saving face. In fact, adults are often more willing to give in and are not as stubborn as children. If it is deleted, does it cease to exist? Subai asked rhetorically. The boy was silent, and his eyelids began to slowly close at this time. Zombies are born from the resentment of heaven and earth. They do not belong to the 5 elements, disdain reincarnation, and are angry with both humans and gods. Look at what you look like now, like a salted fish waiting to die. The little boy remained unmoved. Subai took out his mobile phone, turned on the camera, and said, anyway, you plan to die with your stubbornness and persistence, so let me help you take the last picture. In the past, you always took pictures of other people's corpses. This time, you will be used as material. Can you still move? Then choose a look that suits you best. When the boy heard this, his body trembled slightly, and his eyes that were originally closed slowly opened again at this moment. For an artist, losing the passion for creation and losing inspiration is equivalent to losing the meaning of life. Now, he seemed to have gotten some inspiration from Subai's words. This inspiration was even more exciting and effective than the sudden injection of life. Subai held up his mobile phone, pointed the camera at the boy, and urged, speed up, don't die before you get ready. The boy sped up. He tried his best and turned over. Subai moved 2 steps back so that the boy appeared in the cell phone camera screen with his head down and his feet up. The boy is now face up. His arms slowly uncrossed and lay flat on the ground. Keep your legs as flat as possible. At this time, he didn't feel like he was lying in a cemetery, but more like he was lying on a beach filled with golden sunshine. Immediately, the boy's face began to show a kind of youth, innocence, and all kinds of beauty belonging to children. Rotten body. The squirming flesh maggots. Snakes, insects, rats and ants coming and going. With the boy's innocent face. The contrast between the pictures is indeed enough to impress people's hearts. This can indeed be called a wonderful work, a work that can make people feel numb and deeply conflicted after watching it. But Subai shook his head at this moment. Not enough. Saying. Subai raised his feet. He stepped on the boy's face directly. With Subai's current strength, he could fight Boss Liang for 300 rounds in the void. The power of this kick, let alone the zombie boy, had only one breath left. Even in his prime state, he couldn't withstand it. Snapped. Half of the zombie boy's face collapsed after being stepped on by Subai. At the moment, the zombie boy only has half his face left. Half an innocent face. The other half disappeared. Coupled with the tumbling and highly decomposed body of meat maggots. The feeling of contradiction and conflict instantly increased to another level. Click. Subai pressed the shutter button. Then he squatted down, put the phone screen in front of the boy, and said directly, regardless of whether the boy was dead or alive. Are you satisfied with this one? The boy's body, which had completely lost his voice, started to tremble slowly at this moment. The rotting body actually began to recover at this time. The collapsed face even sprouted again. The breath on my body actually started to soar again. An aura belonging to the avenue gradually spread at this time. But none of this is what the boy cares about. When his mouth just recovered, he couldn't wait to praise. Perfect. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1095. My dear, Xiao Erlang, when you carry that skull bag to school, you are not afraid of the sun or the wind and rain. The fat man coaxed the little guy to sleep while humming a song. In fact, the little guy is usually very good and sleeps by himself when it's time to go to bed. But today he just arrived at a new place and the little guy was a little excited. The fat man didn't mind accompanying his godson. Play a little longer. But it seemed that the little guy was not very satisfied with the children's song he was humming. At that moment, the fat man decided to change another song. Stretch out your hand, touch my sister's head, oh, my sister's head smells of Osman thus. The little guy was stunned for a moment, but the fat man became more and more intoxicated as he sang. He seemed to have forgotten that singing 18 touches to a baby was a very shameful thing. After a while, the little guy seemed to be unable to hold on any longer and pressed his forehead against the fat man's belly. Meaning is, own people. Stop singing. Dong dong dong. There was another knock on the door. I hummed. Why is there still someone coming? The fat man was about to scold his mother. He and Dabai had just returned to Shanghai, but there were waves of people coming from the afternoon to the evening. I don't know, they thought that the martial arts leader lived here, and all the listeners came to pay homage to the doc. But in fact, the audience was divided into 5 parts in total, and the 4 of them did not win any of them. If they followed the normal script, with Subai's strength, it would be safe to take a hill and sit there, but it was obvious that no matter what, neither Subai nor the broadcaster were willing to distribute it like this. The fat man came out with the little guy in his arms, stretched out his hand and opened the restriction. The restrictions imposed by Lao Fang's family have been the best refuge and support for the four of them for a long time. Of course, for those who are now enlightened, these restrictions are no longer effective. But just like the wooden fence door in ancient times, people can jump in casually but still stand behind the wooden door and knock on the door, which shows a kind of respect. The iron door was opened. A woman walked in from outside. This is a Western woman. With her long burgundy hair, breathtakingly exquisite figure, tight leather pants that make people think of her, and a face as good as porcelain, she is a foreign woman, but she possesses the grace and softness of an Eastern woman, while retaining the beauty of a Western woman's figure. Absolutely hot. The fat man was immediately dumbfounded and fell into the brother pig state regardless of the fact that he was still holding his godson in his arms. Such long and plump legs. So pretty. So big. My belly is so big too. Abdomen. The fat man suddenly woke up. Grass. This woman is actually a pregnant woman. Sudbai, come back. The woman asked. This. The fat man didn't know how to answer. Then, the fat man felt that this woman seemed a little familiar. It seemed that he had seen it before, but the impression was not deep. For Western listeners, the fat man was not very familiar. Familiar, and he has met quite a few listeners, but some people are just casual acquaintances. What are you looking for Sudbai for? The fat man asked tentatively. Damn it, didn't Dabai just say he was going out to meet friends? Why did he come to his door? And she actually has a big belly. Damn it, Yu Shenjingbing turns out to have such a rich life. And every time Fatty and I go hunting for game, you actually show contempt for me. At least Fatty didn't even get a smooth. Emma couldn't wait for the pig-looking man in front of her to reply. She frowned slightly and asked. I'm looking for Sudbai. I know you are looking for Sudbai. Coming here, it is not my seed. The two monks have eggs, which means they have no eggs, so only Dabai is left. The fat man rolled his eyes and said, he has something to do and is not here. Am I late? Emma shook her head helplessly. Can you tell where he is? I couldn't sense his breath. Before that, I was in Suzhou, and I came here because I sensed the energy fluctuations here. Came here. Then be careful, there's no rush for this kind of thing. The fat man reminded that coming so fast would probably consume some of his energy. Although the Western woman in front of him is also a boss, she has a big belly after all. It's not good if the baby moves, but foreign women don't seem to care about this, they don't even sit during confinement. The fat man lowered his head and looked at the little guy, and found that the little guy was biting his fingers and smiling silly. Ding dong. The fat man put a hairy chestnut directly on the little guy's head. You are stupid, you are not my biological child, do you understand? The little guy covered his head and looked at the fat man with some grievance. The fat man's heart immediately melted, and he immediately said protectively. Be good, my godfather loves you, my godfather loves you. Emma took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled it, and said directly, he will come back. Huh, the fat man was stunned for a moment. At this time, the fat man instinctively thought that Sudbai had noticed that this woman was coming to see him, so he found an excuse to leave. Alas, although the fat man did not like Sudbai doing something like this. It's shameless to have a responsible attitude, but after all, buddies are buddies. If he doesn't cover and act as a wingman, who else can act as a wingman? He said he was going back to Yunnan, the place of enlightenment in the East. Do you know him? Fatty started talking about the train. At this time, even if Dabai wanted to take a bath in the sun, he could not say that he would be back soon. The station in the East is in Shanghai, why would he leave at this time? Emma was obviously a little doubtful. He is the guardian of the place of enlightenment, so he has to go back to do some processing. The train is about to leave, but he can make the round trip in time, the fat man replied. Oh, Emma nodded and turned around to leave. The fat man breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment, Emma stopped again, turned around, and looked at the little guy in the fat man's arms. Is this Subai's son? Foreign. Eeing this foreign elder sister point at him, the little guy actually responded. But the fat man's mind immediately came to mind, Cinderella, Snow White and other stories like this. Grass. Haven't walked in yet. Are you just thinking about your eldest son? His godfather, I'm not dead yet. It stands to reason that Fatty doesn't usually have so many things going on in his mind. The only reason to blame is that a lot of things happened tonight and there were a lot of people here tonight, which made Fatty a little nervous. Yes, what's wrong? The fat man asked. So cute. The woman came over on her own initiative, trying to reach out and touch the little guy. The fat man took 2 steps back and said, "Okay, come back if you have nothing to do. I want to rest. I want to stay here and wait for her." After all, it was him who left her flesh and blood. The fat man sniffed, and sure enough, it was true. Everyone said this, and the fat man was too embarrassed to drive others away, so he could only let them into the house. The fat man and the little guy returned to the bedroom. Ji Xiangruyi, who was lying on the carpet in the living room, also returned to the bedroom. Emma was left alone on the sofa in the living room, waiting silently. Fatty didn't send a message to Subai or make a call. It wasn't because he was afraid of being monitored by the boss next door, but because he felt it was unnecessary. Everyone said it was your flesh and blood. As an outsider, Fatty couldn't do anything too much. Absolutely. The little guy yawned and fell asleep holding Jixiang in his arms. The fat man instead lay on the bed with his eyes wide open and felt at a loss. Damn it! It's not my flesh and blood. Why am I the one who is anxious now? This proof is barely enough. The boy looked at his body and was not very satisfied. Of course, this was under the condition of comparison. Both sides were of zombie blood, but compared to the boy and Subai, there was a huge gap. It's just too obvious. This photo can be treasured. Subai shook his phone. Unfortunately, there are very few people in this world who know how to appreciate this. I'll treat you to a midnight snack, the boy said. Subai waved his hand. No need, you can call me next time you have a new work. Okay, the boy replied seriously. Subai was not in a hurry to return to Lao Fang's house. Of course, it was not because he sensed Emma's arrival, nor did he know what the hell the fat man's terrible divergent thinking ability had figured out. In the cool night, Subai wanted to take a walk by himself. For him now, it is very simple to hide his aura. Even ordinary bosses of the same level cannot capture Subai's aura even if they are all in the same city. Under the dim yellow street light, the shadow was stretched very long. Subai stopped, took out a cigarette, bit it in his mouth, and stretched gently at the same time. Ying Ying's course should be over, but I don't know whether she will choose to stay in the United States or return to China. If Subai wants, he can open his spiritual consciousness to search. After all, if Ying Ying returns to China, she can only be in Shanghai. But Subai didn't do that. The roar of the train was getting closer and closer. It was not very appropriate to look for Ying Ying at this time. A taxi approached at this time. This place was close to the cemetery and was deserted. The driver happened to pull a car nearby and wanted to take one back on the way. Rolling down the window, the driver shouted, "Master, do you want a car?" Subai stopped, looked at the driver in the car window, smiled, and said, "I don't know where to go. There is a nightclub ahead. Let me take you there. I don't want your money, but I will take the head fee." The driver seemed sincere. Just like that, Subai got into the car. The business of the nightclub near the cemetery park was not as deserted as expected. There were still many people. After ordering a beer, Subai sat down in a corner. The noise of the dance floor, the rhythm of the DJ, the crazy crowd. But Subai found it difficult to blend in and seemed a little alienated. But beyond the barrier, there is a familiar feeling. Until the woman dressed as a white-collar woman covered her mouth and rushed past him and ran to the toilet to vomit. Subai suddenly felt like he was in another world. Turn out to be. It's all over. It's been so long. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 1096. Subai's eyes seemed a little blurred, and the feasting and noise around him seemed to have another layer of meaning in his eyes. This scene was once his beginning. Compared with now, he seemed so innocent. In the past, I thought it was the beginning of a nightmare, but now it seems that it is not so pure. I can't even tell whether it is good or bad. This world is still mostly gray after all. Generally speaking, only when people get old will they have nothing to do and often have feelings. They will often look back on the past. Subai doesn't know if he is old, but this kind of feeling seems to mean some kind of mood. Beginning and ending. In fact, it's so close. The female white-collar worker had already come out of the bathroom, and Subai also stood up and was about to leave. Remembering is a very intoxicating thing. No matter whether you failed or succeeded, everyone is still equally qualified to look back on the past. But Subai was unwilling to indulge in this emotion too much, because it was meaningless. After walking out of the nightclub, he did not call for a taxi this time. He chose to walk, but this time it was very fast. 5 minutes later, Subai walked back to Lao Fang's house. There was another strange smell in the room. The most obvious manifestation of the disparity in strength between the two sides is that the strong one can hide his aura in front of the weak one, but it is difficult for the weak one to do this unless there is a special skill or magic weapon to help. Are there guests at home? Pushing open the iron door, the door of the house also opened at the same time. Subai saw Emma, who was standing at the door. It was obvious that she came out of the living room impatiently when Subai pushed the door. "We meet again," Subai said. At the same time, Subai also noticed Emma's bulging belly. This woman who likes eating meat and is used to swallowing all the men who pursue her can actually be pregnant? "I'm here because I want to borrow something more from you," Emma said, her purpose straight to the point. Over in the bedroom, the fat man tiptoed open a little of the curtains to take a peek, secretly saying to Dabai that it was time to pay off his debt. He was a little gloating about his misfortune, but also a little sad at the same time. "Go in and talk." Subai walked into the house and poured himself a glass of orange juice. He did not prepare it for Emma, because Subai remembered that this woman had a unique taste. He was a zombie and a vampire. Sometimes he would eat food that was difficult for ordinary people to understand, but this woman's staple food is those things, which are much more extreme than herself. "Give me some more blood," Emma said while stroking her big belly. "I need it." "It seems, not a child." Subai took out a cigarette and lit it. "How did you find out?" Emma said, a little surprised. "You know, your friend didn't notice it." Yes, Fatty not only didn't notice it, he also thought it was Subai's child. "You can't have a child." Subai shook his head, "unless you suddenly wanted to eat your own child on a whim, so you specially conceived one as the main ingredient." "Isn't this reason too arbitrary?" Emma was stunned for a moment. She didn't think that the person sitting in front of her could see through her own heart at a glance. "What you are carrying is not a child, but a demon fetus." Subai tapped his fingers gently on the coffee table. "This is something that is difficult to sense, but you have my flesh and blood in your body, so I can see it more clearly than others." "Yes, you are right, this is a kind of undead magic." Emma shrugged. She didn't mind confessing to Subai. Moreover, some things were just made up by the fat man. This woman also had a close relationship with Subai. She hadn't done anything, so it would be too far-fetched to say that she could conceive his child with some flesh and blood. Of course, Emma didn't know that there was indeed such a technique in the pre-Qin period, but it was too difficult and had long been lost. Moreover, this method could only pass down someone's bloodline, but from other perspectives, it was not the same as the original one. There is no similarity, not even the natural ability can be inherited, at most they will look slightly similar. Therefore, it is a kind of dragon-slaying technique. For those who want to do it, it is too difficult for them to complete. For those who can complete it, it makes no sense at all. The magic fetus is a bit similar to Pandora's box. It contains terrible curses and disasters, and Emma used herself as the mother's body to give birth to it. Its purpose is also very clear, it is nothing more than to go to another world. There will be one more method later. This method is not necessarily life-saving, because it is more suitable for the fish to die and the net to defeat the net. Subai did not answer whether he was willing or unwilling first, but asked, "Are there many people choosing to do this recently?" "It's not a lot, both in the East and the West," Emma answered honestly. "In the past, in the real world, it was almost impossible for you to destroy the world or make some big news, and radio would not allow you to do so, so most listeners did not go in that direction, but since they want to in that world, some people began to have these thoughts. Anyway, after arriving in that world, most of the restrictions on broadcasting will be loosened. Even if the war there makes the world a mess, broadcasting will not matter, so this kind of weapons of mass destruction began to become popular. I used to think that the person who was studying this waste of time also started to think about it. This can be said to be crazy, or it can be said to be the last supplement before the big exam. It is also good to give yourself more means to enter that world." Subai picked up the teacup in front of him, his nails lightly scratched his palm, and blood slowly flowed out. This is not blood essence, and Emma is not so greedy to ask Subai for any blood essence. When the blood reaches half a cup, Subai moves away his hand, and the wound heals instantly. Emma smiled slightly, picked up the teacup excitedly, and drank it in one gulp in front of Subai, with a flush on her face. "Su, your blood tastes so delicious." Emma praised. Judging from the meaning, she still had more to say. "Are you okay?" Subai asked. "Huh," Emma looked a little surprised. She stood up, walked to Subai on her own initiative, lowered her head, and made her moving face very close to Subai's. "Last time I came to see you, I brought Black Dragon Scale, exchanged some flesh and blood with you. This time, Su, why are you so generous?" "Because I pity you." Subai's answer was also very honest, so honest that it hurt. "Boss Liang, Chen Ryu, and Hills are all capable and confident people. As for Emma, when everyone was senior, she was not bad, but now everyone's comparison ratings are different. She, of course, it's not excellent. Therefore, this kind of people are often the most restless and extreme at this time." Subai once said before that the current atmosphere in Shanghai is meeting in 1998, and it is actually these people who are driving it. They are frightened, they are uneasy, they are calm on the outside, but they are really flustered on the inside. "I don't want to owe you anything." Emma gently unbuttoned her collar and said, "Do you want to have a pregnancy spring? There is a friend of mine in the bedroom. You can go find him. If he is willing, just accept your reward for me." Subai stood up and left the sofa, meaning to see off the guest. Of course Emma didn't stupidly run to find the fat man, but left in a charming manner. The fat man walked out of the bedroom at this time, with a look of regret on his face, as if he had missed something. "It's still too late to chase him now," Subai reminded. The fat man shuddered. "I won't go, I won't go. I actually deliberately got pregnant with something magical. I feel panicked just thinking about it. Instead, I prefer to go to the bathroom and ask my aunt to slap my big back. That way at least I can have some sense of life." "Hey, I thought it was your seat at first." The fat man touched his head and sat down on the sofa opposite. "Lord Buddha and the monk will be back soon?" Subai asked, counting the time. It was almost time. "Well, I guess it will be like tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. The fat man picked up Sudbai's unfinished orange juice and took a sip. The child is already asleep. Sudbai frowned slightly. Why does this sound weird? There are so many things going on today, the fat man sighed, one stab at a time. Why are there so many twists and turns? It's annoying. The fat man patted his thighs, got up and went back to his bedroom to rest. Sudbai also took a bath, returned to the bedroom, hugged his sleeping son and closed his eyes. It wasn't until the next morning that Sudbai slowly woke up. The little guy was sitting on the bed playing with Jixiang, and Ruyi was crawling on the windowsill. This is a new day, but it is also a countdown day. All of this is likely to become a memory that I will recall countless times in the future. The fat man went out in the morning and no one was there. Taking advantage of the good sunshine, Sudbai moved out the wicker chair and lay down in the small courtyard. He liked this position more and more, because it made him feel as if he was still lying in the coffin of the place where enlightenment was achieved. However, it seems that this comfortable atmosphere can no longer be enjoyed. It doesn't just refer to Sudbai, but also refers to a large group of people in this world who are already at the top of the food chain. The phone shakes and the screen lights up. Sudbai turned on the phone. New message notification found. The notice was concise, but it revealed a sense of urgency. The departure time is advanced, leaving at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Obviously, the Qin army in that world must have done something to cause the broadcast to advance the plan. In fact, it was supposed to be half a month away, but it suddenly became tomorrow. Throw your phone aside. Sudbai turned around and saw Ji Xiang floating up, opening the refrigerator and taking out a bag of fresh milk. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, when the little guy drank milk every day. Ji Xiang, who was holding fresh milk in his mouth, also looked at Sudbai. He didn't understand why Sudbai looked at him like this. But Sudbai knew clearly. This is the last time Jixiang will give fresh milk to the little guy like this. But Sudbai didn't say anything, just reminded. It's getting cold. Iron the milk with hot water and give it to him to drink. Ji Xiang stopped for a while, as if he noticed something. A few moments. The black cat went to boil water.